Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jana Ramadan, and I'm a sophomore at Harvard College. Before we begin, the Ash Center, the Institute of Politics, and the Office for Sustainability at Harvard University would like to first acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as a traditional territory of the Massachusetts people, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. I want to take this opportunity to let Harvard community members and everyone joining us today first know about the Harvard Votes Challenge, which is a nonpartisan initiative striving to build a civic culture here at Harvard by increasing voter registration and participation across the entire Harvard community. We are in the middle of election season in the United States right now, which you all know. And with voting already underway in some states, we have a couple really specific call to actions for everyone participating in this event that is eligible to vote in the upcoming election. So first, for all of you that are eligible in the United States, please make sure to register to vote or to check your voter registration. You can do this through the Turbo Vote link that has been posted in the chat already. And second, we'd really ask you to make a plan to vote. Are you going to vote by mail? Are you going to vote in person early or on election day? What deadlines do you need to be aware of? We really encourage everyone today to make a voting plan and add it to your calendar. Tell your friend, encourage them to make a plan too. And as part of your voting plan, we'd encourage you to pledge that you will vote through the link that was just posted in the chat as well. This pledge form includes some helpful information and links to support you in accomplishing your voter plan, especially for any students who are turning in who are living on person on campus and that are far away from where they are registered to live based on where they live. Harvard Votes Challenge has some means of directly supporting you with your absentee ballot process. And for everyone tuning in who may not be eligible to vote or wants to engage in additional and other ways, I'd encourage you to take part in mutual aid funds if you have the means, or to join community service work at PBHA, the IOP, or in your local community, wherever you are residing right now. We invite all participants to join the movement at voteschallenge.harvard.edu, a link that will also be shared in the chat. Thank you for your attention, and I'm now going to give the floor over to Sanjay Seth, who will moderate today's conversation.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sanjay Seth, a 2019 alum of the Kennedy School and the Design School, and your moderator for today's event. I currently serve as the Climate Resilience Program Manager for the City of Boston, though I'm appearing today only in my personal capacity, and I'm also co-president of the Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment Shared Interest Group. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping first. Today's event is being recorded and will be shared with all participants following our discussion today. Second, please feel free to submit questions at any time during today's event via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We would love to have your questions, and we'll work to incorporate as many as possible into our conversation. We just posted a link in the chat. If you are a Harvard affiliate or alum and are interested in climate and the environment issues, feel free to join this alumni group at the link in the chat, bit.ly/joinHACE. Last but not least, a bit of housekeeping. Thank you to today's event's co-sponsors, the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, the Institute of Politics, Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment, and the Office for Sustainability at Harvard University. Today, we will have a short 10-minute presentation from our guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a second. We'll have another 15 to 20 minutes for discussion, and then we'll end our time together with a solid 20 minutes of Q&A and a call to action for how you can get involved. So first, let me introduce Nathaniel Stinnett, founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. Nathaniel founded the Environmental Voter Project 5 years ago, after over a decade of experience as a senior advisor, consultant, and trainer for political campaigns and issue advocacy nonprofits. He's held a variety of senior leadership and campaign manager positions on US Senate, congressional, state, and mayoral campaigns. He's also formerly an attorney at DLA Piper, and he has a BA from Yale and a JD from Boston Law. Thank you to our audience for joining us today for this event. Nathaniel will now take it away for a presentation that helps us understand why, as he says, politicians ignore climate voters at their own peril. Nathaniel.
Awesome. Thank you, Sanjay. And thank you again to all of the co-hosts of this event that Sanjay just mentioned. And thank you to all of you who are spending even more time on Zoom these days to learn about our work and to hopefully have a really great discussion. As Sanjay mentioned, the way that we are going through the next 54 minutes is I'm only going to make a very, very brief presentation, and then we're going to get to a discussion between Sanjay and myself, and then a broader Q&A. So please bear with me if as I go through my presentation, I only touch on certain aspects of our work very, very briefly. Know that that's by design. I don't want to presume to know what you're going to be interested in. That's what the question and answer session is for. That's what our discussion is for. So with that being said, let me share a slide deck here and we can get going. As Sanjay mentioned, I run a nonpartisan nonprofit called the Environmental Voter Project. And very, very simply, we just focus on two things. One, we find environmentalists who don't vote. And then two, we turn them into better voters. That's it. That's it. And because that's our focus, it also means that we don't do a lot of the stuff that your typical environmental groups do focus on. So for instance, we don't endorse candidates. We don't lobby for particular policies. We don't even try to persuade people to care more about climate or the environment, as odd as that might sound. A good way to think of us is we are in the behavior change space, not the mind changing or opinion changing space. And I'm going to very briefly discuss with you why we focus in that area, and then how we do this work, how we get non-voting environmentalists to start voting, some of our results, and then give you some fresh off the voter file data of environmental voter trends in the current election. So one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, we can't get consistent environmental leadership in the United States, not just at the federal level, but also at the state and local level, is simply there aren't enough voters who care deeply about climate and the environment. What you're looking at right here is going back 5 years ago in the 2016 presidential election. And you'll see only 2% of likely voters at that point in time listed climate or the environment as their top priority. And another 2% listed it as their second highest priority. So if any of you were frustrated like I was that we went through 3 presidential debates in 2016 without a single question about climate or the environment, this is why. This is why. When there aren't enough voters who care deeply about something, let me tell you, boy, is it hard to get politicians to talk about that issue, not to mention debate moderators or the press. Now, as many of you likely know, the numbers have gotten a bit better since 2016. So if we fast forward a bit to 2018, the 2018 midterms, 7% of voters listed climate or the environment as their top priority. And here we're looking at exit polling data. Now, I want to be clear, this is an apples to oranges comparison. The midterm electorate is different from the presidential electorate, both in size and sort of makeup of who votes and who doesn't vote. But even with that apples to oranges comparison, by any measure, going from 2% in 2016 to 7% of voters listing climate or the environment as their #1 priority is a big deal. It's a big deal. And I would suggest to you that it's no surprise that coming out of the 2018 midterms, you start seeing groups like the Sunrise Movement have much more purchase and much more power because they had all this electorate, sort of electoral power wind at their backs. And it kept on happening all the way through 2019, such that some of the polling data at the end of 2019 and early 2020 showed that 12% of likely voters in the upcoming presidential election listed climate or the environment as their top priority. And surprise, surprise, unlike we saw in 2015 and 2016, in this year's Democratic primaries, you even had candidates who made climate and the environment their sole focus, the sole focus of their campaign. When the number of environmental voters goes up, politicians follow. Politicians follow. But what I want to suggest to you, and this gets to the focus of why we do what we do at the Environmental Voter Project, this ain't nearly enough. When you have 8, 9, even 11 or 12% of voters listing climate or the environment as their top priority, boy, is that better than 4 years ago, but it is nowhere close to the number of voters who are listing healthcare and immigration and economy and jobs and even public safety now as their top priority. And that has a huge impact on policymaking and on how campaigns are run. Because, and I know many people in my audience already understand this, but for those of you who don't, this is crucially important. Campaigns almost always, not always, but almost always, only target likely voters. And if there's only one thing that you remember from this presentation, let it be what I'm about to say. I think we all understand, we all grow up knowing that who you vote for is secret. That shouldn't surprise anybody. But what many people don't know is that whether you vote or not is public record. It's public record. And not only is it public record, it is quite literally the essential building block to how all campaigns are run and all policy is made. Because if I'm running for governor, and all I need to do is open up my laptop to look at public voter files to see who has a history of voting in gubernatorial elections and who doesn't, and I've got limited time and limited money, and all I care about is getting more votes than my opponents on a Tuesday, who do you think I'm going to talk to? When I literally know by name and street address who votes in these elections and who doesn't, I'm going to target the likely voters. Unless I'm bathing in money and I have all the time in the world, in which case, yeah, maybe I'll dip down to talk to people who have a 70 or 80% likelihood of voting. But campaigns, by and large, only target likely voters, which means, of course, they're only going to poll those people too. And so this is why it's not just essential as a political campaign building block, it's essential for understanding policymaking. Anybody who is in a policymaking role knows whose opinions matter and whose opinions don't. And I know this sounds deeply cynical, but it's just the essential truth of policymaking at the federal, state, and local level. Politicians don't really care about the opinions and priorities of non-voters. They care about the opinions and priorities of voters. And we can pretend to be shocked, but again, we literally know by name and street address who votes and who doesn't vote. So why the hell wouldn't you pay attention to that information? It's something we accept at face value in all other aspects of our lives, right? Like if you're running Ford Motor Company, you're not going to do market research with 3-year-olds. They can't buy your product. They're not your market. Well, similarly, politicians don't do market research with non-voters. They do market research with voters. And so the reason I get into this is why those previous 2 slides that I showed to you were so important. Because when there are too few voters who care deeply about a particular set of issues, that has enormous ramifications. Now, the reason I started the Environmental Voter Project a few years ago was because I came to realize something really extraordinary, which is it turns out the reason so few voters care deeply about climate or the environment is not because too few Americans do. In fact, it turns out there are tens of millions of Americans who care so deeply about climate or the environment that it's their #1 priority. So why aren't they showing up in polls of likely voters and exit polls of actual voters? Well, for one really interesting reason. It turns out that environmentalists are just awful voters. It turns out that the environmental movement does not have a persuasion problem. People don't need to change our minds. They need to change our behavior. We have a turnout problem. And as you'll see just with this one data point, in the 2016 presidential election, 10.1 million already registered to vote Americans who care so deeply about climate or the environment that it's their #1 priority, 10.1 million of them, just stayed home and didn't vote in an election that was decided by 77,000 votes in 3 states. This is why we focus on what we focus on at the Environmental Voter Project. We think the low-hanging fruit is not trying to change people's opinions about climate change. It's not trying to turn people who don't care about the environment into people who do care about it. Instead, we go after these people. We go after the people who don't need their minds changed. They just need their behavior changed. And before I get into how we do it, I just want one more slide defining the scope of this problem because I think it's so important. If we look at the 2014 midterms, 44% of registered voters voted, but only 21% of environmentalists did. A huge, huge turnout gap. 2016 presidential, 69% of registered voters voted, but only 50% of environmentalists did. 2018 was a lot better. I think we're all aware it was a blue wave election, sky-high turnout, and certainly sky-high progressive turnout, and environmentalists did a lot better. This turnout problem is getting better. But boy, can we not pat ourselves on the back. Not for scratching and clawing and just barely almost making our way up to the national average. I don't need to tell you the enormity of the crises we're facing. And believe me, when you look at other issue constituency groups, they're not trying to break even. They're not trying to hit the national average on voter turnout. Take, for instance, people who care deeply about gun rights. If you're an NRA member, you're not trying to hit 57% in a midterm. Your only question is, are your people going to turn out at 80 or 85%? If you're an NRA member, you vote like it's your job. You vote for library trustee and dog catcher and city council, like you never miss an election. And that's where we need to be in the environmental movement, because there are actually 4 times as many of us as there are NRA members. We're just not voting. So very quickly, and this is why I prefaced my presentation warning you that I'm not going to go into an enormous amount of detail on how we do what we do, because that's what the conversation is for. That's what the Q&A is for. We do 3 things, some of which, I'd say 2 of which, many sophisticated political campaigns do right now. And so I want to be very clear. It isn't like we're unique in some of these tools that we use. But the way we find these environmentalists who aren't voting and then get them to vote is, first, we use data analytics and predictive modeling. This is how modern political campaigns now target people. No one targets by demographic group anymore. What they do is they have these huge surveys where they poll tens of thousands of people, isolate the ones who list climate or the environment, let's say, as their top priority, and then work with data scientists to build models that help them predict how every single individual in a state voter file is likely to feel about that issue. It's very similar to the process that, say, insurance companies go through when they're building actuarial tables, and they take lots of different applicants' information and try to predict, looking at everybody else in the country, how long each applicant's going to live. Well, campaigns do the same thing, but they're trying to predict, okay, how likely is Sanjay to support Joe Biden or Donald Trump? How likely is this person to be a super environmentalist? We do the same thing. I'm happy to go into more detail during the Q&A. But what this then allows us to do is individually identify the people who have a really high likelihood of listing climate or the environment as their top priority, yet they aren't voting. And what that opens up to us in step 2, mobilization, is it allows us to bypass the hardest, most expensive part of politics, which is changing people's opinions and changing their minds and educating them on issues. We can bypass all that stuff and be completely agnostic in our behavior change messaging. I mean, the weird thing about the Environmental Voter Project is we never even talk about the environment. Instead, we run hundreds of randomized control trials just figuring out which messages work best with which subgroups of voters to turn them from non-voters into consistent voters. And hell, we would talk about chocolate chip cookies if it was the best way to get them to vote. And then finally, third, habit reinforcement. We are not an election-winning organization. We are an electorate-changing organization. And so what we do is we go into these states that have lots of non-voting environmentalists, and we use every election, local, state, federal, primary, general, special, as a behavioral intervention opportunity. Because as I'm sure will come as no surprise to any of you, if you're trying to change someone's behavior, you can't do it if you only talk to them every 2 or 4 years when there's a big, sexy federal election. It's just not how it works. That's not how like a nutritionist gets you to change your eating habits. It's not how a coach gets you to exercise more often. And so we take this habit reinforcement really seriously. Very quickly, I want to close so that we can get to our discussion and our Q&A. When we do this, we have now almost 6,000 volunteers who canvass, call, and text these voters. We also send them direct mail and digital outreach. All of our messaging relies on hundreds of randomized control trials where we test which messages work best in getting which of these environmentalists to vote. I can get into some of the behavioral science that we use and that we've found works best, but very quickly, we treat these people as social animals, not rational animals. And so we never try to convince them of the importance of voting. Instead, we use like little peer pressure and social pressure tricks that perhaps we'll get into. In our first multi-state campaign in the 2018 midterms, we increased turnout 2.7 percentage points over our control group, which was good enough for adding 59,000 brand new environmental voters to the electorate. We graduated 93,000 people out of our program by the end of 2018, by which I mean 93,000 of the non-voting environmentalists we had been targeting had, by the end of our second full year, not just voted in federal elections, but also state and local elections. We expanded from our original 6 states, which you see here in yellow, to another 6 states. And so these are the 12 states that we're currently in. We did this last year, and you'll see we were active in 613 local and statewide elections last year, when most groups were still sleeping off their hangovers from the midterms. We took these local elections really, really seriously as behavioral intervention opportunities. And sure enough, by the end of 2019, we had graduated 253,000 of these non-voting environmentalists into super voters, including, I might add, 51,000 in the state of Pennsylvania, a state that was decided by 44,000 votes in 2016. Now, we don't have enough data from our new states to measure how many have graduated yet. Finally, we're obviously active now. There's an election going on, in case you haven't noticed. We are targeting 2 million never ever voted before super environmentalists in those 12 states. So we are only targeting people who are registered to vote, have a really high likelihood of listing climate or the environment as their top priority, but they have never cast a ballot before in their entire lives. 73,000 of them, including over 30,000 in Florida, have already voted. These are first-time environmental voters. Finally, I just want to give you a quick snapshot of where environmental voter turnout is overall in some of our states. So we only target the never voted before folks, but we also have data on other environmental voters. You'll see Pennsylvania, 4.74% of registered voters have already voted. Over 10% of environmentalists have. Florida, 11.9% of registered voters have already voted in Florida. Over 19% of environmentalists have. And North Carolina's got a huge gap that you'll see there. Now, I want to caution you, these are not at all predictive of eventual turnout. Moreover, much of what you're seeing probably isn't unique to environmentalists. It's probably just that because of things the president has said and other things, progressive voters are now much more likely to vote by mail than conservative voters are. But these are some really, really interesting trends. I want to end there. I have a call to action slide, but maybe we'll do that at the end because I'm 4 minutes late. Sorry, Sanjay. Let's get to our discussion. But this is the kind of work that we do at the Environmental Voter Project, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with all of you about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Nathaniel. I am so hopeful to see that 73,000 folks have already gotten into the mix for this election. That is so lovely to see. All right, let's jump right into it. So, thank you for allowing us to go through a quick presentation of your work. One of the things that I think a lot of us are interested in learning more about is that identification piece. The first step of this is, the secret sauce. What is it? Your team uses this predictive model to assign a score from 0 to 100 that helps you determine whether someone is actually an environmental voter. And then you only target those who don't vote or who are irregular voters, right? That's like the core of what you're trying to do. So one, what is that model? Yep. And two, could you take us into some of the factors that have played into that model? Some of the things that are most or least predictive that might surprise us?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think first it's helpful to sort of go back in time to a time before predictive modeling and talk about how campaigns targeted voters, because this is still how many people often think of it. Prior to about, I'd say 9 or 10 years ago, the only way that campaigns could target voters was based on the information that was on public voter files, which was pretty basic. You know, name, street address, gender, age, party affiliation, census tract data, things like that. And so this is why in the 2004 and 8 and even 12 elections, you heard about large demographic groups that were being targeted, you know, soccer moms, NASCAR dads, things like that. Big data has totally killed the soccer mom, Sanjay.
Really?
And yes, the soccer moms are dead. Big data killed them. And what's clear is not just what we do at the Environmental Voter Project, which I'll get into, but all sophisticated political campaigns now no longer target by demographic group. They target on individualized bases using these predictive models.
Right.
So now let me go into the process. It starts with an enormous poll. Now, your typical political poll would only survey 600 or 800 people, maybe 1,000 people. A predictive modeling survey is enormous. You'll survey 10, 15,000 people per state. And you can get away with it. It's not too expensive to do because you're only asking one question. You're just saying, hey, Sanjay, what's your #1 most important political priority? And then you call 10, 15,000 other people in Massachusetts. And let's say out of those 15,000, 3,000 or 4,000 of them list climate or some other environmental issue as their top priority. It's then the easiest thing in the world to work with data scientists and start to figure out, okay, what do these 4,000 people have in common? What do we know about them from voter file data, but also census data, and also publicly available behavioral and consumer data? And I want to be clear, we only use publicly available data. Most campaigns and organizations only use publicly available data. Cambridge Analytica, which stole a lot of data, is thankfully very unique in this space. But all of that data allows us to get a really rich picture of who these 4,000 survey respondents are who said that climate or the environment is one of their top priorities. And what we're then able to do is start seeing, which of these data points, and this gets to your second question, which of these data points seem to be really predictive in helping us identify environmentalists? And I'll answer your question, but I want to give an enormous caveat here, Sanjay. No single data point is ever predictive on its own.
Which is fair.
Yes. But things like, we have found that regardless of your age, whether you're 18 or 88, if you have ditched your landline and only use a mobile phone, you are much more likely to list climate or the environment as your top priority.
Really?
We also find in almost every one of our states, basketball fans are more likely than baseball, hockey, and football fans to list climate or the environment. Yeah, I know. Don't read too much into this. They aren't they aren't predictive on their own. But what's more important, Sanjay, is when you put them together, that's where the real magic happens. When you put them together and you can say, if you are an aging hippie who lives in the Berkshires and bought a Volvo 8 to 10 years ago and shops at the Gap and subscribes to National Geographic, well, holy moly, you've got like a 92% likelihood of listing some environmental issue as your top priority. And these are frighteningly accurate. And so I think it's so important for everybody who's watching to understand this is how the Biden and Trump campaigns are targeting you now. They have assigned every single one of you scores in their own proprietary versions of the voter file, telling them, oh, Sanjay has an 81.3% likelihood of voting, and he has a 91.2% of likelihood of voting for this candidate. And these are the issues he's likely to care about. Every single person has their individualized scores, and this is how campaigns target people now.
I'm glad you're on our side.
It's a little freaky. I'm glad I'm on your side too, but I also want to be clear. There's nothing about this that's proprietary. This is how everybody
Right.
on the right or wrong side is now doing political targeting. It's really, really individualized and precise.
So what we've learned, soccer moms are dead.
Yes.
Demographics, no one uses those anymore. We use points-based systems. And doing a survey of 15,000 people can let you learn a lot about the kind of associations that people make with environmental voters. I think that identification piece, right, and your ability to index that against the voting records, the public voting records, is really the genius of this. And then you focus on all these techniques to mobilize people. And so I want to dig into that a little bit because that's, again, not necessarily secret sauce. These are behavioral techniques that have been tried and tested, but you put them to such good use. And so I guess the second question that a lot of people on the line are probably curious about is digging into these techniques. You look at voter pledges, peer pressure, social pressure. It'd be great to hear a little bit about, obviously what you're using and what's been effective, but also what hasn't been effective. You've done a lot of experiments to test things out, and we'd love to hear more about the different things you're trying, and if you're
Yeah.
trying anything new, especially for this election.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like in many ways, we love our failures too, because this is all about like testing weird new stuff. And our number one goal is voter mobilization, but we also serve as this almost full-time perpetual field laboratory. So we love testing weird stuff. So first, let me talk sort of in a theoretical framework, and then I'll get down to actual sort of nitty-gritty of messages that work and don't work. We certainly stand on the shoulders of giants, many of whom are academic giants. There's a lot of great research being done by behavioral economists, behavioral psychologists, and just behavioral scientists in general, sociologists, figuring out not just how to get non-voters to vote, but how to get people to vaccinate their children, how to get people to exercise more often or eat healthier. I mean, there are a lot of very important societal behavioral challenges that a lot of people at research universities are doing great research on. And by and large, our current generation of behavioral scientists has come to realize that most people, consciously or subconsciously, when they are deciding whether to take a particular action or not, are not acting like rational beings. We like to think that we're hyper-rational people in a marketplace, like making cost-benefit analyses, but we're not. We're not. We're much more societal beings. We're people who look at what our peers are doing, look at what our family is doing, and even more importantly, we're people who build personalities for ourselves and are hyper-aware of how we are viewed. And that, more than anything, believe me, if you've ever watched like a beer commercial lately, like Madison Avenue's been on this for 20 years, the way you get someone, the way you prompt them to buy a product or do something is to appeal to who they are and who they want to be, not necessarily like rationally convincing them of their ROI of a particular action. So that's the theoretical framework. What does that mean in the nitty-gritty? It means the best way to get a non-voting environmentalist to vote is not to try to rationally convince them of the value of their one vote because they care about climate or the environment. Even though that sounds like a really smart way to go about doing it, all of our studies and many other people's studies show that just doesn't work. Instead, we try to figure out what societal norms do these people buy into? And how can we leverage that to turn them into better voters? So let me give you an example that Jana actually just mentioned. She said that for the Harvard Votes Challenge, part of what she wants people to do is to sign a pledge, a promise to vote. Well, here's why pledges work. They seem simple, but it's deceptively so. They actually rely on a lot of sophisticated behavioral science. One of the strongest societal norms we have, not just in the United States, but across the world, is that most people want to be thought of as honest promise keepers. And so if you've never voted before, Sanjay, and I get you on August 14th to sign a promise to vote, that's like a bear trap on your leg. I have successfully trapped you now, because what that allows me to do, Sanjay, is now I can come back on November 1st or 2nd and say, hey, Sanjay, I just want to remind you, back on October 14th, you made a promise to vote. I know it's important to you to be an honest person who keeps his promises. Well, the election is coming up on Tuesday, and I might follow up with you after the election to find out how your experience was, because we know it's important to you to be a trustworthy person. Now, is that a little
Vicious.
yeah, it's a little vicious, a little like passive aggressive, but now, instead of me trying to convince you of the value of your one vote out of an election of
It's
150
me convincing
million,
me.
yeah, it's a completely normative framework where the act of voting is going to decide whether you keep your promises or not. Another example of what we use is just basic juvenile peer pressure. We will send people text messages that say, hey, Sanjay, did you know last time there was a presidential election, 73 people on your block of Main Street turned out to vote? Just pure juvenile crap. But it sends turnout through the roof because we've never left the 4th grade playground. And when we think that all the other people, all of our neighbors are voting, or all of our peers or our fellow students are voting, we feel like that's something we ought to be doing. And I could go into
and we lose that sense of invisibility, right? It's not like we can hide anymore. It's like, oh, they saw that I stayed home instead of going out.
Absolutely. And you brought up actually one of the most powerful prompts to get people to vote. And again, I don't want to make it seem like this is something we invented. A lot of very sophisticated voter mobilization groups now actually send voting history report cards to individual voters in the mail to reveal in a very creepy Orwellian way, hey, we know what elections you voted and what elections you don't. And does it piss people off sometimes? Excuse me? Yes. But it sends turnout through the roof. Because another societal norm that we've discovered is that even people who aren't very good voters want to be thought of as good voters. And so if you reveal to them that it's public record whether they vote or not, you can sometimes increase turnout 3, 4, even 5 percentage points over the control group, which is a
That's amazing.
big deal in this business.
That's amazing. And also, the question of having a report card sent to your home, there's maybe some PTSD with that for people who might not have enjoyed report cards growing up. But I think the sense of accountability to each other that it brings out is key, right? It's not even just we want to be honest to ourselves, but it does give us a question of who are we to each other once we see the report card, right, and our performance on it.
That's exactly right. But I do just want to mention one thing, because it gets to the second question you asked. Not all of these things work the same way among different subgroups. We have realized that demographic groups that are historically oppressed and deal with voter suppression issues, you don't actually want to send them voter report cards and say hey, I'm looking over your shoulder whether you vote or not. And so you asked for some of our failures.
Right.
It isn't a particular message that we've tested has just cratered and depressed turnout. But what we often find is that it does really well with one subgroup and not so well with another subgroup. So it's really important to test this stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. And your use of randomized controlled trials and, figuring out essentially what works and what doesn't, that's such a resource. One of the things, we've talked a little bit about some of the techniques you use, the peer pressure, report cards, texting them, having them make pledges. Those are classic and effective models. And one of the third part of your model, right? Identification, mobilization, and then habit forming, right? Getting these people to graduate out of your process. I'd like to talk just a little bit about that, and then we'll move to some of the questions in the Q&A that are coming up. So how do you make people, is there any secret sauce to going from yeah, we got you to vote once to, okay, you are now officially a likely voter and we're going to start polling you for the real stuff now?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The secret sauce is almost just hard work. I mean, the work that we do at the Environmental Voter Project, none of it is stuff we've invented. We took this data analytics stuff and we took this behavioral science stuff, and we're applying it in a way that a few other groups do, But what's truly unique about us is that we're only targeting the non-voting environmentalists, and we do it in election after election after election. And so is that something that anybody could do? Yeah, you're darn right it is. But so many people don't do it because they're so focused on just winning one-off elections. And so you asked about that special sauce. Yeah, there is something really efficient and cumulative about the impact on voter turnout if you start going back to them time and time again, for three reasons. One, a lot of research has shown that voting is a particularly sticky habit, because a lot of people, if they've never voted before, have really dramatic misconceptions about how hard it is or what they might need or things like that. And so it's this really sticky habit such that even if you never go back to someone, they're dramatically more likely to continue voting. The second thing that's going on there, it gets back to that one thing that I said at the very beginning that no one's allowed to forget from this presentation. Whether you vote or not is public record. If we get you to vote for the first time, Sanjay, let's say we get you to vote in a city council race, it then only takes 2 months for the record of you having voted to show up on public voter files. And then it's like there's this bright red beacon next to your name telling everybody, look at me, I vote in like little municipal elections. And then, I mean, like the cavalry comes in. All of these well-funded political campaigns for people running for president or governor trip over themselves, and they start spending money to turn out our voters at no cost to us. And then that is when all of these policymakers start paying attention to the issues you care about, whether they get you on the phone for a poll or not, because of all of this predictive modeling. Chances are, whether they get you on the phone for a poll or not, they've already assigned you a score. They know what issues you care about. It's just a question of whether you're going to count to them because you vote or not count to them because you don't vote. And so that quickly gets to the third thing. There's just this virtuous cycle then, where once we get someone to vote, and especially if we get them to vote, federal, state, and local, then everybody else starts piling in on them, making sure that they vote, and politicians start responding to the issues that they care about. So you're even more likely to keep on showing up because you think that it's a much more responsive and efficient marketplace, which of course it is.
It's amazing to think the electorate we have isn't the electorate we have to have.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I think that in a very deep sense, most Americans are cynical about politics. And I think what I want to say is like, yeah, be cynical, but actually take your cynicism one step further. Most of you think, oh, politicians only do what it takes to get them elected. Yeah, that's right. And so what that means actually, because whether you vote or not is public record, that means that it's not that your vote doesn't matter, it's that your vote is the only thing that matters. Politicians care so much about being elected that by not voting, you literally mean nothing. Like you have no say in the policymaking process. And so, I'm not like a Pollyanna-ish type person, but I think it's so crucially important for people to be a voter and not necessarily view the act of voting in a transactional sense. Of course, your one vote isn't going to make a difference. I know we're not allowed to say that, but like, come on. If you've been through second grade math, you know it's probably not going to make a difference. That's not why you be a voter. You're a voter because those are the only people whose opinions matter.
Exactly. And I think, again, one vote might not be the deciding factor, but one of the things that's come up in our Q&A and also in your presentation is really interesting. 2016, 107,000 votes across 3 states flipping or changing or growing the electorate would have actually changed the electoral college that delivered the current president. In 2018, you targeted more than 2 million voters. You added 59,000 new voters. You made regular voters out of another 94,000 voters. You had this huge measurable impact. Given the impact that you had and the billions that are poured into campaigns every year, why isn't everyone, one, doing what you're doing to bring new people to the table as much as they are trying to persuade people? And two, is it because it costs a lot more to mobilize a non-voter than a voter? Or what's what's driving this delta and why isn't everyone doing what you're doing?
Great question, and for a few good reasons. Not everybody should be doing what we're doing. So first off, if I'm running Joe Biden's campaign, my goal is not the long-term health of the environmental movement. My goal is to get more votes than my opponent in a few important states on Tuesday, November 3rd, period. And what I should not be doing is spending all of my time and money talking to people who I know have no history of voting. And so it's really, really important to understand that even though we use a lot of similar tools from campaigns do, and we're in the political space and the turnout space, if your goal is winning one-off elections, talking to really crappy voters is not the most efficient use of your resources.
Fair, yeah.
The second reason why a lot of groups don't do this is there's a low ceiling, right? Like there are only so many non-voting environmentalists out there to target. Third, the approach that we take at the Environmental Voter Project only makes sense if the constituency group that you care about has a turnout problem, right? If you don't have a turnout problem in your constituency group. So for instance, if I was the head of the NRA,
right,
this is the last thing in the world I would do. My people already vote. I need to spend my money making sure that they know who to vote for. And so, yes, there's nothing proprietary about this approach. Yes, there are a lot of efficiencies that we get, but it's really only useful if you're not working for a candidate campaign and you are trying to beef up the political power of an issue constituency group that doesn't have a turnout problem, or that does have a turnout problem. Yeah.
That makes sense. It's kind of a stewardship challenge as well. You're carrying this from election to election. We're getting a lot of great questions in the Q&A, which I'm trying to keep up with. Thank you all for sharing your questions. One thing that's coming up for a lot of people, I think everyone is aware of the upcoming election. They're aware of people in their lives who may be poor voters or maybe need a little push. If a member of our audience was talking with someone face-to-face that they thought was a climate voter, what are 2 or 3 compelling things that they can do either today or before the election to get them to vote? Like if you were talking to a cousin or someone, what can you do that might work?
Right. Really, really great question. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is something that works even if you're not talking to them face to face, because I know that doesn't happen that much these days. Use your social capital rather than your ability to rationally convince people of something. Remember some of the behavioral science stuff that I said. Just know that whether you're on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or talking to your family or on the phone or emailing people, there are hundreds of your friends and neighbors and colleagues who look to you for societal cues. They look to you. My guess is many people look to you, Sanjay, to get cues on what it means to be a good environmentalist. Maybe there are other people in the audience who have people look to them on what it means to be a good physicist or what it means to be a responsible academic or a good student or a good student leader of an extracurricular group or things like that. You all have social capital. And so the most important thing you can do is be loud and proud about being a voter. You want everybody in your circle to look at you and just know, oh, well, it's important to Sanjay to be a voter. I don't want you to just say on Facebook, hey, I voted, look at my ballot, or look at like the thing around my circle on Facebook. No, I want you to be saying, I'm an environmentalist and that's why I'm a voter. Or because I'm a young person, I am a voter. Or because I care about this country, I am a voter. Make those like very simple noun only, like normative statements about like, if you're a this, then you gotta be a voter. That's what's so important. That's what's so important to push. Just know that everybody is looking to you for societal cues. And that more than anything is where your power lies to increase turnout. The second thing I would just say, although it's far, far less important than the first thing, if you're actually having a face-to-face conversation, it often works if you let people know it's public record whether you vote or not. I know it's a little creepy, but it
No,
works.
I mean, it's accountability. You can't be scared of accountability. But, you know, I think the point of saying this is who I am and people who are like me do this versus I think this is a good argument for you to consider. I can see how one is more persuasive than the other. You know, we're getting questions from folks who are wondering, which is great. They're wondering, one, how can they support your work or get involved in your work? And two, what constraints does the Environmental Voter Project face in terms of scaling up?
Yeah. Awesome question. Feel free to ask questions like that from here on out. You can go to our website, environmentalvoter.org. Every single day, we have volunteer training webinars where people can get trained online and immediately start calling and texting these non-voting environmentalists we've identified. And don't worry, we won't throw you to the wolves. We'll train you. You'll be using apps that prompt you with this behavioral science informed messaging that we know dramatically increases the likelihood of these people voting. And so we'll do it all for you. So that's the first thing. Go to environmentalvoter.org and sign up to volunteer. Believe me, with 20 days left, you don't want any regrets. Not this time around. Second thing is, another thing you can do to help our work, which also gets to challenges in scaling, is donate. We're a nonprofit. What's more, we're what's called a 501c4 nonprofit, which means foundations can't fund us. Almost all of our money comes from individuals. 501c4 nonprofits are advocacy organizations, so it's almost all individual funding. The limits to scaling are money. It just takes money to do this. It takes money to identify the people. It takes money to send them direct mail and digital ads and texts and phone calls and all of that. We are really, really efficient. You can look at our annual reports on our website and see how efficient we are. But yeah, the money keeps us from scaling. But the third thing I just want to say is we only go into states where there are huge populations of non-voting environmentalists. We need those big fat denominators to have an impact. Because even though, what's a good state? Wisconsin is obviously a politically important state, it doesn't really make sense for us to work there because there aren't that many non-voting environmentalists. So it doesn't matter how good we are, we're never going to be able to leverage that into impacting federal, state, and local policymaking. So there is, we ain't anywhere close to it yet, but there is a cap to how much we would want to scale. It probably only makes sense for us to be in about 23 states where we've identified significant populations of non-voting environmentalists, but we ain't there yet. We're currently working with a $2 million budget. We can still raise about another $600,000 over the next 20 days and efficiently turn it into new voters. But beyond this cycle, when we're looking to scale up, it's expanding into additional states.
That's great. And people can donate on environmentalvoter.org?
They absolutely can. There's no limit, none at all.
Excellent. You know, it might be weird to talk about post-election when we're still in the ramp up, but it'd be interesting to hear as a steward of the environmental voters, what happens after 2020? What's your plan?
Yeah, well, first of all, I hate to break it to y'all, but there's at least one, probably two Senate races in Georgia that are going to go to a runoff that'll be decided on January 3rd, I think, maybe 4th, 5th.
It will never end.
It'll never end. And those are going to be insane because literally the entire world is going to turn its eyes to Georgia and like $200 million are going to be spent on two little Senate races. So like, yeah, this is never going to end. But, you know, I don't think I need to tell anybody on this Zoom that I don't want to be overly dramatic here, but like every election becomes the climate movement's last best chance, right? Because we are like rolling towards the edge of a cliff here with the climate crisis. And so, yes, 2020 is enormously important because it's a presidential election, because we do redistricting, so we bake our cake for the next 10 years for a lot of state and federal legislative bodies. But I mean, Sanjay, you're working at Boston City Hall. You know very well that big city mayors can save the planet. State governments can save the planet with tweaks to building codes and zoning codes and parking regulations and traffic laws. And so what's going to be really important, not just for our work, but I hope for everybody on this Zoom's work, is taking those municipal elections very seriously, taking the state elections very seriously, because those are really high points of leverage from a policymaking point of view, but also from a political point of view. Bear in mind, the Environmental Voter Project only targets environmentalists who are unlikely to vote. Obviously, the number of environmentalists who are unlikely to vote in a presidential election is comparatively small. The number of environmentalists who are unlikely to vote in a municipal election is enormous. So in these local and state races, we have significantly more leverage to dramatically change not only who wins the election, but more importantly, what they campaign on and what kind of policy is made. So we're really, really looking forward to the mayorals in 2021.
That's really hopeful to hear the impact you can have in local and state, because as someone who works in local and state, it is an area that, has been driving climate action in the absence, and hopefully will continue to. I know we've essentially hit the end of our time together, but I just wanted to thank you for spending time with us today. I know you're living on breathing Zoom and also trying to, figure out this election. So thank you very much for sharing about the Environmental Voter Project. You can learn more at environmentalvoter.org and donate. And thanks again to the event co-sponsors, the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, the Institute of Politics, the Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment, and the Office for Sustainability. I just want to give Nathaniel, before we end, just one last chance to say any final thoughts you have that you want to leave the audience with.
Yeah, I'll just say, in 20 days and 3 hours, we're going to be sitting down on our couches to watch election returns roll in. And if you're anything like me, you're probably going to be sick to your stomach with anxiety. And so do a favor for that future version of yourself and get in the game, whether it's with the Environmental Voter Project or a campaign or another organization. Get in the game. You are never, ever, ever going to get these 20 days back. And no matter what side of the aisle you're sitting on, I think everybody recognizes the importance of the next 20 days. So don't have any regrets. Get in the game.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel. In the spirit of the Environmental Voter Project, remember, real environmentalists vote. Your voting history is public information. And by attending this event, you have shown you care about voting. So if you don't, who are you really? Please vote early, vote now. And if you can, find a few non-voters and help them make a plan to vote today. Thank you, Nathaniel, for taking this time today. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, everybody.